Over the last few weeks, the life changes to our nation have been, they've been life-changing. And for us as church, there have been two major impacts. The first has been on our gathering together, or not. This has meant an end to what we understand as fellowship and the shared times together, and that's ended for the immediate future. However, through some considerable innovative thinking, we have to a degree overcome or at least mitigated the effects of our closed buildings. Facebook, WhatsApp, Skype, Zoom, and a host of technological wonders, some of more exotic names than that, have been there to help. The second effect has been far more profound, the effect upon our worship. With our churches closed and inaccessible to us, the way we view and engage with worship has been severely affected, and the manner of our involvement in worship has been challenged. It is worship and how we engage with it, in these days, that I would like to consider during these 3 short sessions together. Rest assured, they won't be heavy doctrinal diatribes or long-winded theological discourses, nor overly simplistic Bible studies or excerpts from some theological college essay. Rather, I offer them as a means of exploring our worship, and maybe by exploring down an unexpected side road, we may find something new in our understanding of worship that may help in these extraordinary times. Think of them as more like fireside chats, where we can safely explore these things among friends without fear of criticism or hurtful argument. I'd like to suggest that the 3 sessions we share together, these explorations, will consider 3 questions. The first, to try and consider and work out a working definition of what we mean by worship. Secondly, we look at worship and the tools of worship. And thirdly, let's then consider what worship looks like. At first glance, you may consider all those 3 questions to be obvious. But isn't that the delight of exploration? Unexpectedly coming across, the unexpected. For exploration involves exposing oneself to the danger of being surprised. After all, if we know all the answers, there's very little point in looking. For any journey of discovery, you will need to take with you certain items. And may I suggest that for our little exploration, we take with us an open heart, an open Bible, a sackful of curiosity, and a willingness to ask why. For the one thing I can guarantee in our times together is that we will not find all the answers, but we may just come across some of the right questions to ask of ourselves. So if you wish to accompany me on this exploratory journey, let us begin. So let's start with our first question. What is worship? It's a daft question, I hear you say. We all know what worship is. We've been doing it every Sunday for years. And that's just my point. I suspect that joining with us today are a range of people who have a much broader understanding of worship because of their many and diverse backgrounds. There may be many of you listening who are lifelong Anglicans ingrained in prayer book. There may be some Roman Catholics firmly embedded into the catechism of Christian doctrine, which is where, as a 5-year-old, I began my spiritual education. Or there may be also a number from a free church background, and nonconformists. Or, of course, that one group which overlaps us all, the charismatics. All of the perspectives they bring will be different, but none of them will answer the question, as they demonstrate different methodologies of worship, not what worship is. And we will look at the methodologies of worship as tools tomorrow. What precipitates worship? What is the precursor that produces these different expressions of worship? That's the question we struggle with today. So let's look into our Bibles for some possible answers. Starting with the last book, the closing book of the Scriptures, Revelation. For nowhere else do we see such a concentration of accounts of worship. Let us look very briefly at a few to try and discern the common factors. In chapter 4, verse 9 to 11, we are sat eavesdropping in the throne room of God, where the 24 elders fall down in worship. In chapter 5, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fall down before the throne and sing a song of worship. In chapter 5, slightly later in verse 14, we find the elders once again falling down and worshipping. In chapter 7, the angels and the elders and the living creatures, they all fall down and worship. And in chapter 19, the 24 elders and the 4 living creatures are all at it again, all joining together, falling down before the throne in worship. The overwhelming commonality is the presence of God. But that really cannot be a surprise, as the venue is heaven itself, and in particular the throne room. Are there other places which have this characteristic of the presence of God, which is not heaven-based, that we can look at? Well, yes, there are. And maybe, surprisingly, many are in the Old Testament. For example, in Joshua 5, Joshua is planning to attack Jericho when an unknown, unrecognised soldier approaches him. And when Joshua demands to know whether he is for them or for our enemies, the man identifies themselves as commander of the army of the Lord. On hearing this, Joshua falls to the ground in worship. And there are 2 interesting things about this. That the individual themselves that Joshua falls down before accepts the worship, which suggests that they were worthy of it. And if that's the case, then we have to accept that just possibly the commander of the army of the Lord is none other than Jesus himself, a theophany, a manifestation of Jesus prior to his earthly birth. Now please, don't get hung up on what for many will be a strange word. A theophany is simply God himself appearing in the form of his Son prior to Jesus' birth, which could cause your brain to scramble very easily. But it's something which happens in the Old Testament quite often. On other occasions, this person is named as the angel of the Lord, or the angel of God, or the Lord of hosts, but always in the singular, the angel of the Lord, the angel of God. And there are other experiences of those being met by God or the presence of God. How about Ezekiel? In chapter 1, in chapter 3, and in chapter 43 of his book. On each occasion, Ezekiel saw and knew the presence of God and then fell down to worship. And one more offering for you just to look at. In 1 Kings 18, Elijah has just won the battle of the prophets. The prophets of Baal have been shown up for what they are. And Elijah has called down the fire of God onto the sacrifice. And the sacrifice and the altar and the stones and the water are all consumed. And not one person fell down and worshipped, but all the people fell down and worshipped. And there are many more examples of worship where the commonality is God. And we've just looked at some of them that have been in strange and amazing situations. But the other common factor here is not just the presence of God, but is that each individual, each person responded to God's presence. There was a response. And I would suggest that this response was brought about not by the physical act, but by something that stirred in the hearts of the people involved. Now, of course, we could have a rather fruitless debate as to whether the examples in Revelation are flawed because we don't know whether angels or the living creatures, whatever they were, actually have hearts. But we certainly know that the 24 elders did. And we know that Joshua had a heart, and Ezekiel, and Elijah. And one I didn't mention was Jacob, who had 3 such experiences of Jesus before his birth as a theophany. So on the basis of what we've just discussed, may I propose a working definition of worship? Something simple, something relatively easy. And I would suggest this. As a working definition of worship, that worship is the response from the heart to being in the presence of God. Now, I don't claim that to be perfect. Just as a means of facilitating our reflective, exploring journey around worship. Just to ensure that we start in the same place and that our exploration begins with a common vocabulary and understanding. And if you don't agree with that definition, that's fine. This is a safe place to disagree. I can neither see nor feel your rage, so that is fine. But in the spirit of our exploring together, please consider why you think that definition is flawed. And just saying, I don't agree, is not enough. You see, explorers don't say, I'm not going to go there. They go and look and see what they can learn from the unknown and then draw their own conclusions. Expose yourself to the danger of finding something new in God. Next time, having got a basic premise, a basic description of what we're going to talk about, we'll consider worship and the difference between worship and the tools we use to worship. Until next time, God be with you.